Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is How COVID-19 Impacts Home and Auto Insurance, presented by Cowan Insurance. My name is Allison Mitchell, and I'm part of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce team. Before we start our webinar, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. Your microphones should be muted, but if you could please double check that to ensure we reduce background noise, that would be appreciated. We are encouraging you to ask questions throughout the webinars, and you can do so by typing your questions into the questions box in your control panel. And our presenter will be answering your questions at the end of her presentation. After the webinar, we will be sending you a follow-up email with a link to today's webinar recording, as well as a link to where you can access today's slides. Our presenter today is Tracy Spark from Cowan Insurance Group. Tracy is a business development executive with Cowan Insurance. I would now like to invite Tracy to begin her presentation.
Thanks, Allison, for that introduction. Okay, so today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about financial relief for individuals with regards to their personal insurance. And so this includes, we're going to be talking about financial relief measures and insurer expectations, personal home and auto relief measures, as well as payment flexibility and payment relief and insurer initiatives. So let's just jump right in and talk about relief measures and insurance expectations. So on April the 8th, it was announced that the Insurance Bureau of Canada, who speaks on behalf of the insurance companies, shares substantial customer relief measures are coming. And so, I quote, this came from the CBC News announcement, "This is an incredibly challenging and uncertain time for insurers, and we want to make sure that we're alleviating some of the financial burdens that Canadians are feeling." And so the ask from the Minister of Finance and from the government is that help needs to be right now. It needs to be in the way of refunds and flexibility. So with regards to how we're using our cars right now during COVID, as well as how we're using our homes, and as well as payment flexibility. So these are really important. But keep in mind, as we go through the presentation, these relief measures, as I'm sure you're aware in probably your industry as well, these are changing at a rapid pace. We are seeing announcements come out daily from the insurance carriers. So, and all of them have a vastly different solution. So it's going to be important, and you're going to hear me say this throughout our presentation today, it's going to be really important that you're talking to your insurance broker about your specific insurance provider. So let's talk about personal auto. So to start, adjusting your driving usage during a pandemic. So if you're no longer using your vehicle to drive to work and back, you may be entitled to a reduction in your insurance premium. So it's important to note, so if you're normally driving back and forth to work and now you're pleasure use, and that's changed, now you're working from home, you can certainly give your insurance provider a call and talk to them about this, and there will be some premium reductions. But it's going to be really important that you understand that when it's time and you get called back to work, it is your obligation to make sure that you're talking to your insurance broker or your insurance provider to tell them about that change. So that's really important to note. Delivering PPE supplies and food for those in need. So lots of people are really stepping up during COVID and being neighborly and picking up groceries for your neighbors, that sort of thing. And that is fantastic. We are seeing a lot of our insurance companies practicing some flexibility around people that are doing that. What I would say on this point, though, is if you are doing that, make sure you're talking to your insurance provider and letting them know that you're doing that to be sure that there's no implications. And again, I will say, broad brush, we are seeing a lot of flexibility in this area from insurance providers, not charging any additional premiums. But again, because they're also specific, make sure that you are telling your broker what you're doing, just to be sure that there's no coverage impacts. If you're considering removing a car off the road completely, I would say there's some options for you here to consider. So one would be, rather than removing coverage completely off your vehicle, consider just reducing coverage to comprehensive only. So that'll still give you windshield, vandalism, fire, and theft. So although you won't be able to drive your car because there's no liability coverage, if it were vandalized while sitting in your driveway, you'd still have coverage. There is another endorsement that you could do, that you could put on as well. So if you're, again, thinking of reducing coverage on your vehicle, we call it the endorsement 16, which is a suspension of coverages. So really what you're doing is exactly as the endorsement talks about. You're just suspending coverage for the interim. So it drops the liability off of your vehicle, but it still continues to have comprehensive, which is windshield vandalism, fire, and theft. But this one also still allows you some basic accident benefits on your policy. So again, although you can't drive the car, if for whatever reason you had your car parked in the driveway with a your parking brake on, and for whatever reason the car popped out of the parking brake popped out, and the car were to roll down the driveway and injure somebody, you'd still have some basic accident benefit coverages that would respond. So something to think about. The other thing to think about if you're thinking about taking the car off the road completely is if you have a lien or a lease on the vehicle. If you have either of those on the car, you may not be able to reduce coverage down to comprehensive only. Insurance companies are willing to take your direction and do as you ask. However, we would require something in writing from the lien holder or the lessor to say that they are comfortable with reducing coverage as a result of the pandemic. So those are all things that you want to think about before you just reduce coverage. So with regards to vehicles left behind in the United States, so we're seeing again carriers being, very flexible for people that had to leave their cars, perhaps in Florida or the U.S., so that they could fly home for the government's request. So if that situation were to pertain to you and you still have a vehicle in the States because you needed to fly home, again, you'll want to be talking to your insurance company about how long coverage will last on your vehicle, the safety of the vehicle, where is it stored. They're going to want to know all of that. I, again, can't say whether a company is going to charge premium or not for that, but in most cases, we're seeing a lot of flexibility. So again, that's one that you really want to make sure you're picking up the phone and talking to your insurance provider on. As you can imagine, vehicle registration, licensing a vehicle is difficult during the pandemic with MTO either closed or having reduced hours. So again, our insurance companies are recognizing that there is an inability at this time with restricted hours or closures in registering a vehicle. So we know that our insurance companies have said, or many of them have said, that they will accept a signed bill of sale and allow coverage until which time you're able to get into the Ministry of Transportation and make the transfer. So again, you're going to see messaging all through here around insurance companies are being flexible. So although each of them is very different in what they're offering, the flexibility remains. Everybody wants to do the right thing and really worked with their customers on finding solutions. So we'll just move on to home insurance. So lots of questions have been coming up about home office use. So many people are working from home as a temporary measure. So if you're not seeing clients in your home, this is not your normal business practice. This is a temporary measure and a plan to go back to work. Many of our insurance companies are not making any changes to your policy because of that. When it crosses over into a business exposure is when, again, you've got signage out front. Let's say I operate an accounting firm. From my home, I've got people coming into my home. That's vastly different, and that would be a commercial or business exposure versus during a pandemic, I'm working from my home office. I'm not seeing anyone. I don't have any signage out front. I'm just working from home until such time that I can get back to work. So again, lots of flexibility there and no changes to the home office setup. There are situations where we're seeing frontline responders requiring help with childcare during the pandemic. Again, under a normal circumstance, the policy wording, depending on the company, says, no more than 5 kids in your home that aren't your own, then that needs to cross into a business exposure. In this case, we're seeing insurance companies have a lot of flexibility. So if you're having to take in neighbors' kids, you might even be getting paid for it. We're seeing a lot of flexibility there. So again, if you're doing something like that to help out during COVID, I would just make a phone call to the insurance broker and talk to them about what you're doing, just to be sure that everything is lined up. But again, we are seeing a lot of flexibility there. So unoccupied and seasonal property expectations, again, with recent travel restrictions in place, it makes adhering to any insurance obligations for checking your property almost impossible. Now, we are starting to see things loosen up a little bit in this area, but many of the insurance companies are waiving your insurance obligations to have to go up to your property simply because of the travel ban or the travel restrictions, I'll say. Certainly, if you can get a neighbor to check on your property, so if you're not going to go up to the cottage and you're going to continue to quarantine at home, we would say if you can get a neighbor to check on the property in your absence, that certainly would help and provide you peace of mind at the same time. So with regards to payment flexibility, if you're having a hard time making your next payment, I would say talk to your insurance brokers. Again, we're seeing a lot of insurance companies step up to the plate and really offer some payment flexibility. So this is in the way of deferred payment options. And we're seeing companies defer payments up to 3 months. So if you can get ahead of it, if you know that this might be something you're going to have a hard time paying your next insurance bill, call in advance if you can, and we can certainly work through some payment options with you. Pay-as-you-go insurance, this is something that CAA is offering specifically. So this is kind of neat. This is a telematics device that you would put in your vehicle, and it charges your premium based on how often you're driving the car. So it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you enroll in CAA's MyPace. You install the app, so they'll send the device to your home. You install the app. Once the device comes, you install it in your vehicle. You download the app to your smartphone, and then you drive. And then based on your driving habits is what you'll pay for insurance. So that's a really neat option. This would really only be applicable, though, for anybody that's driving 9,000 kilometers or less in a year. Vehicle models need to be 1997 and newer. So certainly applicable right now while people are home. Under normal circumstances, this would be great for students perhaps, or somebody that's retired, but it could be used under the circumstance today as well. So that's something that we're seeing that's neat. Generally, policies that go into delinquent status usually get canceled under a normal circumstance. But again, as I said, we're seeing a lot of flexibility around this. So under normal circumstance, it would automatically get canceled. If a policyholder has a policy that goes into delinquent status during the pandemic timeframe, many of our insurance companies are saying they're going to work with their consumers to find a solution. So that could be reinstating the policies that went into delinquent status, waiving NSF fees. Again, they're really trying to make things very flexible. So if you're somebody that likes to go in and pay your insurance bill, and again, in order to adhere to social distancing requirements, online payment options are also available. So there's a lot of flexibility that we're seeing from our insurance carriers. So if we go on to payment relief and insurer initiatives, and this goes back to that recent announcement that the Ontario government had around really putting some pressure on the insurance carriers to help during the pandemic. These are some of the insurance carriers initiatives that I want to go through. At Cowan, we represent on the personal line side, we've got over 20 companies. So we can't go through every one today, but I want to hit on a few because again, they're all vastly different. So Aviva is implementing a price promise to freeze all of their auto renewals. So whatever your renewal premium was this year, as it renews, it will be the same. That is their commitment to their insurance companies or to their customers. CAA is doing lots of great stuff. They're providing a 10% discount based off their base rates for new customers and existing customers, both for their home and property. And when I say property, I mean their tenants, condo policies as well. So that's pretty awesome. In addition, CA just announced on Friday, they're also going to, on top of this 10% rate reduction right across the board for consumers, they're going to be doing $100 payment relief for anybody that's got an auto policy that's in force. And so there's nothing you need to do. They're just going to cut a check for $100 payment relief that's going to be sent out to all CAA customers that had a policy, an auto policy, in force as of May the 1st. Economical is allowing customers who are driving less to have their annual kilometers amended. So certainly from commute to pleasure. So there's a credit whenever the insurance company does that. But on top of that, they're also going to allow a 15% off, up to 15% off of their premium as well until June 30th. So again, all of these things really are helping. But you can see from Aviva, CA, and Economical, they're all vastly different how they're handling them. Or Mutual is also doing something called a parked up payment. This is kind of a neat as well. This is a one-time payment equivalent to 20% of your 3 months auto premium. Again, consumers don't need to do anything with regards to this. It's going to be automatic. So anybody that's got an in-force policy with Gore Mutual is going to get that rebate automatically sent to them for 3 months of their auto premium. Northbridge is doing something similar, so you can see a trend here. They're all doing something, but again, it's very different. Northbridge also will be doing something in the way of a 15% rate rebate for all vehicles, policies that are in force that we're carrying full coverage, and that rebate will be for April, May, and June. So again, I would encourage you to talk to your broker or your insurance company about what is specific to you. So if you're not with one of these insurance carriers, we are seeing, Travelers doing something. There's Edge Mutual, Hallwell. They're all doing something, but they're all very different. We can't touch on all of them today. But again, I would encourage you to make sure that you're talking to your broker about your specific insurance company and what their initiatives are. So moving on, we're here from you. So talk to your broker about cost savings measures. So this can be maximizing your discount. This could be exploring coverage adjustments, including the usage of your vehicle, any insurance company relief measures. And again, we're seeing this changing at a rapid pace. We're seeing insurance companies coming out with new relief measures literally on a daily basis. And so make sure that you're having open dialogues. I would say, we're here for you to answer your questions. Brokers are spending the time to walk you through what is available to you with regards to your specific situation as well, and providing you with consultative advice and guidance as well as best practices. I would say, in closing, we're here for you. This is the time where brokers can really demonstrate their value proposition to you. So make sure that you're reaching out and we can talk about your specific situation to you and how you can take advantage of some of these relief measures. So with that takes us to the end. And I just wanted to thank you very much for your time and open it up to any questions that anybody may have.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Tracy. As Tracy mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to type your questions into the questions box in your control panel. We'll start maybe with one question that we have here. So you talked about the auto premiums and about there being some rate reductions. And it looks like there are rate reductions for those who commute, but also just in general, some insurance companies are offering rate reductions. For those companies that are, like Economical, for example, is it an automatic, or will people that are with Economical have to call in to request those discounts?
That's an excellent question. And this really is per company. So this is not straight across the board for everybody. The companies right now that are doing these rebates where you don't need to do anything, you don't need to call in, would be Gore Mutual, Northbridge, Travelers, and CAA. So those are all the companies that are automatically going to do the rebate. They just do an automatic calculation and they'll send a check out. So you don't need to call in, that will be automatic. With the others, you need to be more proactive. So with an Aviva, with an Economical, if your situation has changed, then you do need to pick up the phone and call in and request that amendment to be made. And then that will initiate some rebates. So again, that's why I go back to, because they're all so vastly different, make sure that you know, if it's not one of those companies we talked about, it's not CAA, it's not Gore, it's not Northbridge, it's not Travelers, all the others, if you're not with one of those, then you need to call in proactively and see what is available to you.
Okay, great. And kind of leading into the next question. So if you are having to call into your broker, or, you know, if you deal with an insurance company directly, can you give me tips on specific questions that the individual should be asking of their broker or their insurance company? You know, if they're in a position where they don't know whether there's any discounts, is there any, I guess, keywords or key questions that they should be asking?
Yeah, excellent, for sure. I would say, you know, it's worth a conversation just to say, you know, and again, it's a very personalized discussion depending on your personal situation. But if I'm now working from home and I'm not commuting anymore, I would be calling in and saying, you know, my name is Tracy Spark and I'm working from home. I'm no longer commuting back and forth to work. I don't know, you know, when I'm going to be called back. Can I, or what is your recommendation around reducing my coverage from commuting to pleasure use? And is there any specific additional discounts that my specific insurance company is offering me? That's one scenario. The other is, again, if you've decided you're going to take in some kids to help out your neighbor who's a front line, you'd want to call in and say, this is the situation. I'm helping out during the pandemic. I'm taking in, you know, 3 kids. I am getting paid, or maybe I'm not getting paid. What is your recommendation and how does that impact my insurance? So I would say it really depends on what your situation is. For the most part, the commuting to pleasure use hits just about everybody that's been quarantining from home. So that's a pretty standard one to ask and be comfortable asking. The taking in kids, delivering PPE, that's a little different. So again, if you're doing any of those things, I would definitely call in and just find out if there's any impacts that your insurance company is imposing on you.
Okay, great, thank you. And with the remote working, a lot of people have more office equipment at their house than normal. So some businesses have allowed their employees to take the laptops and the monitors and the desk chairs, et cetera, so that they can set up their home offices at home. Because they have this additional equipment that they don't normally have, are there any considerations for their own personal home insurance? Does that have any bearing on it whatsoever?
No, most policies, I'm going to say all policies have coverage automatically for your office equipment. So there really isn't, and we're seeing from our insurance carriers that they're saying they've got limits that cover that equipment that's at home. So that should not be an issue. So as long as it's standard things like your phone, like your printer, that sort of thing, which majority of the people are using just those supplies, shredders, that sort of thing. So coverage on your policy already, whether it's a condo policy, tenants, or home, would allow coverage for that equipment already.
Okay, great. What are you seeing, or what are you hearing from your clients in terms of the biggest questions that they have during this time in terms of home and auto insurance?
I would think, you know, the home office question is a big one that comes up because now they're working from home and wondering if is that now a business exposure? And the answer really is no. If you're If this is temporary, and it is for many people, then that's fine. That's not an issue. We're seeing a lot of questions come in through our phones around commuting to pleasure use. I'm no longer driving in every day, so that's a big question. I think the big thing to note there is if you're going to change the usage on the vehicle, and you absolutely are entitled to do so and get that credit, you just have to really remember that when you do get called back to work, it's your responsibility that you're making sure your broker or your insurance company knows you're now commuting again, so your coverage isn't compromised. So, and I think as we're starting to see businesses open over the next few weeks, people will start driving back and forth to work gradually as we see this move forward. So it's exciting, but it's also, just trying to have these proactive conversations with people. And these scenarios are new for everybody. We've never been through a pandemic before, and hopefully never again in our lifetime. So these situations that are coming up, delivering PPE, delivering food, this is all new for everybody. So I would say, if you've got a question, there is no dumb question. Pick up the phone and call if you're unsure, for sure. Pick up the phone and call.
Okay. And so just picking up on your point of delivering PPE and delivering food, would you contact your insurance company if you're in the situation where you're volunteering to be delivering PPE to hospitals or long-term care, or if you're delivering food to neighbors or some vulnerable populations? If you're just kind of doing it as a volunteer, is that something that would trigger a call to the insurance company?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to make sure that your insurance company knows what you're doing, because as I said, these are changing carrier to carrier. So we're seeing some companies saying, no problem, that's fine. And we're seeing, I would say, one other market or two other markets that are saying, I'm not so sure, we may need to change the policy type. So I would say, yes, you definitely want to have that conversation, even if it's something you think is simple as delivering food. We also want to make sure that your liability limits are sufficient. So we had a situation where a caregiver was driving client's car and picking up and delivering food to them. And that's fine, and it was covered under their policy. However, you have to remember, you lend your car, you lend your insurance, so that can impact your rating. But if that caregiver, for whatever reason, was borrowing your car and injured somebody, that will come back to you. They'll come back to the primary policyholder. So we want to make sure that if you are doing something like that, that your limits of liability are sufficient in the event, God forbid, that caregiver injured or killed somebody, and there was there were some injuries there, or as I said, somebody passed away. You want to make sure that liability limits are sufficient. So definitely, if you're doing anything like that, even if it's something you think might be small, that's a conversation you want to make sure that you're having, that coverage is not going to be impacted. And if it is there a premium charge? And just to review your coverage to make sure limits are going to be sufficient.
Okay, that's a great point, because I think when we think about home and auto, we're thinking about, we're not driving as much, and like you said, the home offices, but we're not necessarily thinking about some of those other things that we're doing to help out. So I think that that's a really great piece of advice for those who are listening. I think we've come to the end of our questions. So if anybody has a question, please feel free to type it into the questions box. I don't see any other questions coming in. So is there anything that you would like to add, Tracy, or have we covered everything?
I think we've covered everything, and I would just say no stone unturned. It's, as I said, you had just touched on this. Sometimes we just take for granted, and we sort of think, oh, well, that's not a problem. I would say just have open dialogue, just to be sure, because we're doing things differently now. So I would really encourage, some open dialogue with your insurance broker, just to be sure everything is covered off appropriately.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I'd really like to thank you today for sharing your time and expertise with us as we're all managing through this difficult time. So it's great to have somebody like you on here to kind of provide your expertise and your guidance. To our attendees, as I mentioned, you will receive a follow-up email that has a link to today's webinar recording, as well as a link where you can find the slides from today. I would encourage you to visit the Chamber's website for a list of the upcoming webinars that we have, as well as a list of past webinars that you are welcome to review. And again, Tracy, I would like to thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.